Ford's Skunk Works division has churned out some of the wildest projects over the years. From the mind-blowing 427 SOHC engine, which was developed in just 90 days, to the top-secret revival of the legendary GT40, it's clear that behind the scenes, Ford has always been up to something special. The early 2000s were no exception. Ford was about to introduce the iconic 390-horsepower supercharged Terminator Cobra, a vehicle that would become a legend in its own right. But there was another Mustang being developed in the shadows, one that had the potential to change everything. Gone was the new modular 4.6L V8, and in its place sat a powerful all-aluminum 351 cubic inch V10 engine, poised to set a new standard for Ford performance. This is the story of the insane V10-powered Mustang that the world never got to see, the Boss 351. Now, if you owned a Ford truck in the late 90s or early 2000s, you'd know that this was the era when Ford introduced their 6.8L Triton V10 engine for their heavy-duty trucks. That V10 was essentially a 5.4L single overhead cam V8, with 2 extra cylinders added. While it might sound like this setup would be similar to the V10 planned for the Boss 351 prototype, the truth is they were two entirely different beasts. The new Boss 351 V10 was designed to deliver giant killer performance from a Mustang, and cramming a heavy 650-pound truck V10 into the Mustang platform would have been a surefire way to make a car that handled worse and cost far more to produce. When the Boss 351 project kicked off in 2002, it marked the end of an era for the new Edge generation of Mustangs, which itself was the final hurrah for the Fox body chassis that dated all the way back to 1979. Ford wanted to send it off with a bang, so a small team of engineers returned to the drawing board to create a brand new V10 engine that could live up to the challenge of producing supercar-slaying performance. At the time, Ford was heavily invested in their modular V8 engines, sticking them in everything from Crown Victorias to Mustangs. This V8, known as the 4.6L mod motor, came in 2 key forms. The single overhead cam version was the workhorse, powering everything from Crown Vics to Mustang GTs, where it made 260 horsepower. Meanwhile, the aluminum dual overhead cam version was reserved for special Mustangs like the Cobras and Mach 1s. I personally own one of these myself. These DOHC4 valve cylinder 4.6S made over 300 horsepower and 300 lb-ft of torque. They were much more rev-happy than the SOHC versions, making them the perfect foundation for Ford's new V10 project. There was just one problem: money. Ford didn't want to invest serious cash into this experimental V10 power plant, or the project in general, so everything had to be done on a shoestring budget, essentially after hours. With this in mind, Ford's engineers took 2 aluminum 4.6L V8 blocks, cut them up, and essentially merged them to create a 10-cylinder version of the 4.6 that now displaced 5.8L, or 351 cubic inches. This process would remain the norm for much of the engine's development, as they did the same with the cylinder heads. They took castings from the 5.4L dual overhead cam V8 Cobra R heads and modified them to fit the new 10-cylinder engine. The Cobra R was Ford's highest-performing naturally aspirated modular V8 and acted as a parts guinea pig for this new V10, sacrificing its internals, manifold, and nearly everything else to be cut and adapted for the new engine. Custom billet cams and a custom billet crankshaft were also created specifically for this prototype to complete the hardware package. The next hurdle came with software and tuning. Since this V10 was based on the Mustang's short-deck 4.6L and not the Triton V10, the existing V10 electronic control unit couldn't be used, which posed a real dilemma. A new ECU was out of the budget, so what did Ford's engineers do? Well, somehow, they figured out that by using 2 V10 Triton ECUs and tricking them into thinking they were each controlling a bank of 5 cylinders, the setup actually worked. The result? A V10 producing 426 horsepower at 6,500 RPM and around 400 lb-ft of torque at 5,000 RPM. For the early 2000s and naturally aspirated engines, those were impressive numbers, especially compared to the 385 horsepower LS6 found in the Corvette Z06 at the time. Ford's new V10 likely had even more power left on the table, which could have been unlocked with a better ECU solution and further refinement of the heads and cams, giving it an even bigger advantage over its competition. Now that this experimental V10 was complete, It was time to drop it into something and show Ford's top brass what it could really do. Luckily, Ford had a Cobra or Mustang test mule that was slated for the crusher, making it the perfect candidate for a transplant, especially since it already shared several parts with the Cobra. With some minor modifications to fit the 10-cylinder engine, the transplant was a success, and Ford now had a running, driving prototype built on the best Mustang chassis available. Backing up the high-revving V10 was a 6-speed manual transmission and a 3.8 three-geared Posey traction rear end. In the quarter-mile, this new Boss 351 ripped off sub-12 second times with ease, proving to be faster in a straight line than both the Cobra R and even the 2003 to 2004 supercharged Terminator Cobras. In terms of handling, there isn't much available, but it's safe to assume it handled similarly to a stock Cobra R, which was the pinnacle of Mustang performance in the early 2000s. The best part? The exterior. You'd never guess what this car had under the hood just by looking at it. The prototype looked like any other silver GT Mustang with minor modifications like the Cobra or hood and a set of Celine wheels. But once you cracked the throttle, the secret was out. This was no ordinary 4.6. For a relatively low-budget prototype, the V10 stunned the few lucky enough to drive it and even impressed Ford's top brass, who pushed for a larger displacement version to explore for future high-performance vehicles, like the Shelby GR1 concept. Sadly, nothing ever came of it. Ford's brief love affair with the V10 engine architecture ended in the mid-2000s, leaving the Boss 351 prototype as the only one of its kind. It makes you wonder, looking at the Mustang's evolution today, with 480 horsepower from the high-revving Coyote V8, what could it have been like with 2 more cylinders? If the V10 had lived on and evolved into a 6.2L, 600-plus horsepower, high-winding V10, we might be looking back at the Boss 351 as the beginning of a new lineage of performance ponies with an exotic V10 flair. But what do you think? Would you consider buying a V10 Mustang? Or does the V8 belong in the Mustang and nothing else? That's the crazy true story of the V10-powered Mustang that almost was. Thank you for watching another episode of Rare Cars Revival. If you enjoyed this video, we'd really appreciate it if you could drop a like and share it with fellow enthusiasts. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Rare Cars Revival YouTube channel and hit that notification bell for more documentary-style videos on the world's most fascinating cars. Until next time, enthusiasts,